there are people who admire the ideas of central planning. And you think, well, maybe there's 40 people doing your central planning. And so maybe they're the smartest people in the world and they're doing your central planning. But they have to calculate on the fly a virtually infinite amount of information if they don't have free market prices at their disposal. They have to calculate what metal is worth, what nails are worth, what labor is worth, what rubber is worth, what cleanup is worth, what nursing is worth, et cetera, et cetera. And they have to do all those comparisons and they have to do those computations. And there's actually no way even technically of doing that. And the alternative is to distribute that calculation across a virtually infinite number of actors, or actors in the billions at least, and let every single person act as a computational device and sum all that. And that's what the free market does. It's not even in principle replaceable by a logical cognitive mechanism. I can't see how it is.
That's exactly right. Because we have centrally planned money, it's pushing hidden risk into the economy, right? Because the free market distributed intelligence being defined as error correction, it's mitigated by the central planning of money. So these hidden risks accumulate, and that's why we've had increased volatility since 1971. We have these huge economic booms. We print a bunch of money. Inflation runs hot, but so do assets. Everyone thinks they're doing really well. And then we have these catastrophic retracements back to economic reality. And actually,
that's because incremental reaction to risk is not being implemented. That's what you'd expect, right?
We're diverging perceptions from reality, effectively. So even the correction in March 2020, that was the sharpest liquidity collapse in the history of markets. It was faster than 1929. So we would expect, as more fiat currency, which is artificial liquidity, is pumped into the system, it's further distorting this economic perceptual faculty and creates even more volatile boom and bust. This is the Austrian business cycle theory in a nutshell. And the only way to resolve this is to let the free market clear errors. That's what it does. That's what consciousness does too, by the way. So you can think of the free market as our interconnected consciousnesses mediated by the price signal. When you disturb the price signal, our consciousnesses become divided and we have increased errors and blow-ups.
Well, that's why I suggest to people that they don't engage in deception, because they distort the value signals and they warp their own consciousness. It's a very dangerous thing to do.
That's right.
Because you only use deception
That's exactly what money does. That's exactly what fiat money does.
Fiat currency is a living lie. That's it in a nutshell.
And maybe to bring this home, you could also ask, like, was the drug addict or was the person suffering from alcoholism saved by the alcohol because he suffered withdrawal? And that's like a very similar question. And then you could argue, yes, we gave him the substance and he survived, so it was a good thing, and he made it through. But what would actually be necessary is kind of, that's not the cure. You would need to quit cold turkey, and that's what Bitcoiners are arguing, or just in general, people advocating for sound money are arguing, that we need to get off the fiat standard that can be arbitrarily manipulated and manipulates the price signals, manipulates the whole economy.
Okay, so that's a fundamental tenet of Austrian economics, is essentially that central planning in relationship to the monetary supply that isn't informed by incremental free market decisions produces error that accumulates and produces cyclical booms and busts. That's very interesting, because there is a psychological analog to that. That psychological analog to that is failure to react to error when they're committed incrementally, to store the errors up, which compound across time, and to collapse. And the oldest myths, some of which I talk about in Maps of Meaning, talk about, for example, the reemergence of Tiamat in the Mesopotamian myth, which is the consequence of corruption accumulates and produces catastrophe. It's the flood myth idea, essentially. So the business cycle theory in Austrian economics is a recast of the flood myth and the Tower of Babel. Is that right? Because those are the two parallels, the two mythological parallels. The Tower of Babel is administrative overload, essentially, and the corruption of systems, and the flood is, the catastrophe. So,
yeah, well, I think you hit on one of the main points of this discussion generally, is that truth is represented across scales. Maybe that's a part of the definition of truth, is that you can see it across scales. It's represented in different forms.
It's certainly part of the definition of deep truth.
Right. And so
yes, definitely.
When we look at Maps of Meaning, I think this is part of the reason why we're so interested in talking about it, is because we take those truths that are seemingly entirely unrelated to markets and money. It's all about mediating the forces of nature, the structure of reality in conjunction with the social relationships that constitute life, and trying to figure out what behavior is the most optimal balance between the two. And I think we could carry that over to money and markets. And
well, it's funny because, maps of meaning could have been called maps of value. And obviously money is a map of value, but I hadn't drawn the analogy between a map of value and money. Although in retrospect, that seems like an obvious thing to do, which is why I got interested in your idea about incorruptible money.
Yeah.
And so you think of incorruptible money as computationally advantageous, essentially. That's the basis of the idea.
Yeah. And I think, again, to pursue this, I think Bitcoin is the regenerative hero in different form. It takes the forces of nature. It digs into chaos, into pure entropy, into pure energy, and let's say mathematics, and spits out the greatest form of order that we as human beings use in the social realm, which is money. And it does so in the archetypal way, in the maximal possible way of doing so. And it does so in an incorruptible manner.
Provides a really weird bridge between the objective world and the world of value too, doesn't it? Because all the computation occurs in objective, like that's objectively real. And that objectively real incorruptible computation produces an unerring signal of value, or that's the theory at least.